You've probably heard that wombats poop cubes, and your first thought was probably the same as everyone else's. Okay, so the wombat has a square butt. That's the obvious answer. That's the wrong answer. And the real explanation is so much weirder that it won a Nobel Prize. But before we get there, I want to show you 10 animal facts where the thing you assumed is almost never the actual reason. Because nature keeps finding solutions that no engineer would ever think of. So this video is a list of 10 genuinely obscure animal facts, but the through line is that every single one of them has a, wait, that can't be right, moment baked in. Not just weird trivia where the explanation is even weirder than the fact itself. I've gone through the research on all of these, so let's start with the one that'll probably break your brain the fastest. The pistol shrimp. This thing is barely 2 inches long, and it has a claw that can snap shut in under a millisecond. When it does, it creates what's called a cavitation bubble, a tiny pocket of near vacuum that immediately collapses. And when that bubble collapses, it briefly hits a temperature over 4,700 degrees Celsius. The surface of the sun is about 5,500. So a shrimp, smaller than your thumb, is generating a flash of heat that's in the same ballpark as the actual sun. The snap itself hits 218 decibels, louder than a gunshot, and the shockwave it sends out can knock nearby animals unconscious. This little shrimp is walking around the ocean floor with a sonic weapon attached to its face, and it uses it to hunt. Not to defend itself, to hunt. That's the part people miss. But the pistol shrimp is just flexing with physics. Some animals skip the physics and go straight to chemistry, specifically becoming a bucket of snot. The hagfish has been around for about 300 million years, which means it was doing this before dinosaurs existed. When something tries to bite it, the hagfish releases a tiny amount of fluid. We're talking a teaspoon. And that fluid expands to 10,000 times its original size in 0.4 seconds. It fills the attacker's gills with thick, suffocating slime. The predator chokes, lets go, and the hagfish swims away. Except here's the catch. The hagfish can also suffocate in its own slime. So after it escapes, it ties itself into a literal knot and slides that knot down the length of its body to scrape the slime off. It uses its own body as a squeegee. A 300-million-year-old fish that defends itself with a snot bomb and then wrings itself out like a wet towel. And if that's not enough for you, there's a frog in Cameroon that takes self-defense to a place that genuinely sounds made up. The hairy frog, also called the wolverine frog, which tells you everything. When it's threatened, it deliberately breaks its own toe bones. The broken ends of the bones then pierce through the skin and stick out as claws. Not keratin claws like a cat. Actual bone, punching through the skin on purpose. Hunters in Cameroon reportedly kill these frogs with spears and machetes, specifically to avoid picking them up and getting cut. We don't fully understand yet whether the bones retract afterward, or if the frog just heals around them, but either way, this animal decided that breaking its own skeleton was a reasonable defensive strategy. But the next one isn't about defense. It's about reproduction, and it is deeply unsettling. The antechinus is a small marsupial, looks basically like a mouse, and the males have one breeding season. Just one. During that season, they mate for up to 14 hours at a stretch, continuously, and they keep going until their immune systems completely collapse. Their bodies start breaking down muscle for energy. They stop producing sperm beforehand, so they can redirect every biological resource toward mating. Internal bleeding, infections, organ failure, and they just keep going until they physically can't anymore. Every single male antechinus dies after its first and only breeding season, before its own offspring are even born. The females outlive them, raise the young, and the whole cycle starts again. It's not a glitch, it's the design. Evolution decided that one catastrophic breeding season was more effective than living longer and mating less, and the math apparently checks out because antechinus are doing fine as a species. Now if you're enjoying this, and I think you are, hit subscribe before we keep going, because we've got 5 more of these and they only get stranger. Okay, the horned lizard. This one is short, but it's perfect. When a coyote or a fox corners a horned lizard, the lizard increases the blood pressure in the vessels around its eyes until they rupture, and it shoots a stream of blood up to 5 feet at the predator's face. The blood is loaded with foul-tasting compounds, probably picked up from the venomous harvester ants the lizard eats, and those compounds specifically disgust canine predators. Dogs and foxes hate it. Birds aren't bothered by it at all. So the lizard has essentially developed a targeted chemical weapon that works on exactly the predators that threaten it most, and it delivers it by making its own eyes explode. The blood loss doesn't harm the lizard. It just reloads and walks away. But the reindeer one is the fact that I think genuinely surprises the most people, because it's so quiet compared to everything else on this list. Reindeer are the only mammal known to seasonally change the color of their eyes. In summer, the reflective layer behind their retina, the tapetum, the thing that makes animal eyes glow in the dark, is gold. In winter, it shifts to deep blue. The blue reflects less light back out of the eye, which means more light gets absorbed, which boosts their sensitivity in the months of near-total Arctic darkness. It's a built-in seasonal night vision adjustment. And the blue isn't pigment, it's structural color, the same physics that makes a peacock's feathers iridescent or a morpho butterfly's wings look electric. Their eyes are literally restructuring themselves twice a year to match the light conditions of the Arctic. Nobody talks about this one. Everyone talks about the antlers. The eyes are way more interesting. The star-nosed mole, though, this is the one that makes you feel like your brain is slow by comparison. It's nearly blind. It lives underground, and it is the fastest eating mammal on Earth. It can identify a food item and eat it in 120 milliseconds. Its brain decides whether something is edible in about 8 milliseconds, which is essentially the speed limit of neurons themselves. You physically cannot think faster than this mole eats. It sees, with 22 fleshy tentacles on its nose that carry over 25,000 touch receptors and 100,000 nerve fibers. 5 times more sensory density than your entire hand, packed into a nose the size of a fingernail. And it can smell underwater by exhaling tiny air bubbles onto objects and then inhaling them back in to carry the scent. It built a workaround for the fact that you can't smell in water. When you look at all of these animals together, a pattern starts to emerge, and the sea cucumber makes it impossible to ignore. When a sea cucumber is threatened, it ejects its own internal organs out of its body to distract the predator, then regenerates them over the next few weeks. Some species shoot out sticky tubules that expand to 20 times their length and entangle attackers. It also breathes through its anus, pumping water in and out over an internal respiratory structure. And, this is real, a small fish called the pearlfish lives inside the sea cucumber's body cavity, entering through the anus by threading itself in tail first when the sea cucumber exhales to breathe. The sea cucumber is simultaneously a weapon, a lung, and an apartment. Nature ran out of normal ideas somewhere around the Cambrian and just started combining things. The exploding ants are the last piece of this puzzle, and they're the one that makes the whole theme click. In certain ant species in the genus Colobopsis, there are specialized workers whose entire purpose is to die. When the nest is threatened and the situation is bad enough, these ants contract their abdominal muscles so violently that their own bodies rupture, and they spray a sticky, toxic secretion all over the attacker. It's called autothesis. It's deliberate self-destruction as a tactical weapon. One ant turns itself into a glue grenade to give the colony a chance. And the colony produces these ants specifically for this purpose. They're not malfunctioning. They're doing exactly what they were built to do. Which brings us back to the wombat, because the wombat's cube-shaped poop is the same kind of story. Everyone assumes there's a simple mechanical explanation: square butt, square poop. But the wombat's anatomy is completely normal. The cubes form in the last section of the intestine, and the trick is that the intestinal wall isn't uniform around its circumference. 2 regions are stiffer, and 2 are more flexible. And because the stiffer parts contract faster, the softer parts bulge outward, and the whole thing acts like a soft mold, sculpting flat faces and sharp corners from the inside. But here's the part that makes it make sense. Wombats use their droppings to mark territory. They stack them on rocks and logs at prominent spots. And cubes don't roll. The wombat evolved a biological mechanism to manufacture non-rolling poop so its territory markers would stay exactly where it put them. Nature doesn't do things by accident. It just doesn't explain itself, so we assume the weird stuff is random. It almost never is. If you want more of this, and there are genuinely hundreds more where these came from, subscribe and I'll keep finding the ones where the real answer is better than the myth. And if one of these broke your brain more than the others, tell me which one in the comments.